Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the lucky number 13th episode of Virginia's for Conspiracy Lovers. I am solo today, and that is because Daniel is on vacation and still kind of a slacker. And I had a guest tentatively booked for tonight, but he had to push it back. So, what I'm going to do is kind of lay out my William and Mary Williamsburg Secret Society, um, hidden history connections. And I'm going to do it with visuals because it is interesting. Well, I don't know if it's interesting to hear me talk about these crazy connections and whatnot, but it certainly is more interesting when you're able to look at it and it becomes pretty undeniable. While some of my research and conclusions are definitely the first one to admit that some of them are confirmation bias, I'm sure, on my part. And um, a lot of it is circumstantial evidence. I think there are a few pretty undeniable visual, some pretty undeniable visual evidence that at least points to that this isn't an accident or it can't be a coincidence. And somebody with some pretty, or some buddies with some pretty deep esoteric knowledge over the span of um, a few hundred years has continued, did and continues to imbue this campus with that esoteric knowledge. You have to excuse my voice. I took my kids to an amusement park a couple days ago, and I'm a little hoarse from screaming on roller coasters with them. But so I'm going to get into a lot of the weird alignments, measurements, things like that. I've got a lot of visuals for you at William and Mary in Williamsburg, and then a uh, a lot of connections to Oak Island, which I had kind of for a while kind of put out of my mind because it seemed too circumstantial. And for a while, the connections to Oak Island that I was making and continuing to find, and each time I'd try to prove myself wrong, I'd find more. I really started to think that it was all confirmation bias and that I just enjoyed watching the Curse of Oak Island too much and wanted there to be connections, maybe where there weren't. And then here in the last 6 months or so, especially since we started the podcast and I really started digging back into some stuff, I found some stuff that I don't think can be explained away too easily. And then also with our friend Court Lindahl coming on the last podcast, he encouraged me in some of the connections that I made to Oak Island, and coming from a learned professional, it gave me some reason and some confidence to dig back into some of that stuff, and I'm glad I did because I found some wild stuff. Anyway, if you're a nerd like me and you like what Court Lindahl does and some of the synchronicities and whatnot, I think you'll enjoy this. So I'm gonna take this off of my ugly face for now, and I am gonna share my screen, and we are gonna get going. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to rehash um, the Great Pyramid of Giza in code in on the campus of William and Mary, the original historic campus. We've gone over it once or twice. I drew a real crappy kind of, drawing on the screen with the mouse, a real crappy kind of John Madden version of what I was talking about, but without any real reference to the actual um, measurements that exist. So I've got some slides here that so you can look at them one to one, and then I'll be going back and forth between this little slide presentation and a Google Earth, which I recently learned how to use properly and how to save my measurements and things like that. So pretty excited about that. So what you have here is the measurement of the Great Pyramid in feet. Um, And without, I guess, further ado, we'll go straight to Google Earth, my favorite toy. And so right here, you've got the original historic campus, this triangle here that we've talked about a bunch of times of the campus of William and Mary. And if I go over here and make the pyramid visible, um, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Now we've got the capstone of our William and Mary pyramid that ends or deviates right here at the very start of the Duke of Gloucester Street, which is the main road of Williamsburg, or as you know, and then stretching further on down Duke of Gloucester Street, what Lindahl likes to call, you know, one of these New Jerusalem configurations of a town. And you look at the type of folks who were involved in laying out of the town. Right down this road, you have Court's his octagonal powder magazine. You have the Bruton Parish Chapel, or I'm sorry, the Bruton Parish Church, where there is all the mystery from Manly P. Hall's wife and a hidden vault that supposedly contains manuscripts of Shakespeare or Francis Bacon, or possibly in a theory from Mr. Lindahl that I'm starting to find more credence in is possibly a one of the things hidden there at the Bruton Parish Church is possibly the resting place of the rebellious Nathaniel Bacon from Bacon's Rebellion fame. So anyway, let me get right into it. I'm gonna ramble until you guys turn it off. So here's our pyramid. Now, what you might be seeing here that seems a little weird is you've got this is Richmond Road here, and it runs all the way to Richmond. And then this is Jamestown Road here, and it runs all the way to Jamestown, the original settlement. Now, these are the two oldest roads in the country. They literally lead from Williamsburg, or what was Middle Plantation at the time, to the original James Fort, and then over here to the original colony at the falls of the James, where Richmond ended up. One thing that I figured out, but you know, threw me for a little while is that you know we do have this great kind of pyramid shape, but you've got this bump out in the road here, and that kind of throws a wrench into things. Except for if you look back at the oldest known map of the campus, and what you see is this is called the Frenchman's map, and I believe it was from the 1740s. And what you can see is that originally Richmond Road was straight, and so was Jamestown Road. Jamestown Road was as straight as an arrow with no bump out in it. And as you can see right here, this is the Brafferton building, which my line runs across right here, right up on the corner of it. And I think it's obvious that at some point later, you know, when cars became a thing and roads were a little bit more dangerous and it wasn't just horse and buggy, that they put that bump out in the road so that Jamestown Road wasn't running right up against the southeastern corner of the Brafferton building, um, and that it was pushed off a little bit. So this is the original configuration of Jamestown and Richmond roads, which were perfectly shaped like a pyramid. And we'll go back to these measurements so that I can kind of prove to you a little bit um, exactly what we're dealing with here. Um, so we'll take the let's see the southern base. No, I'm sorry. We're gonna look at the western base. The western base is 755.772 feet. And I'm gonna burn through this pyramid stuff since I'm kind of rehashing it, but I think when you see how accurate and dead on this measurement is, and then where it points to, kind of in real time, it'll lend a lot more credence and kind of back up the rest of the things that I found. So anyway, we've got the western base is at 755 feet roughly. Now these uh, Google Earth alignments aren't perfect. You can't always place your starting and ending points in the exact place that you want them. You kind of have a little bit of drift with your cursor, but I honestly don't think it's going to matter. It's so close. So actually, this is the original historic campus where the first buildings were built. The Brafferton building was actually the first building. It was a school for Native Americans. Really, what I think is basically an indoctrination center for Native Americans. But this is the Wren building, and it was supposed to be a quadrangle building. So actually, where this line sits is where the original. There would have been another wing that closed this off into a square rectangle-ish building. Um, and we know that that's the case because when Thomas Jefferson came along as chancellor or president of the school, I can't remember which, before the Revolutionary War, he actually had construction restarted on finishing the building that didn't get finished in the early 1700s because they ran out of money. So Thomas Jefferson got the construction project going back up again, and they've done archaeological digs and actually found that right about here is exactly where they started laying the foundations for it, and then the revolution kicked off, and it got abandoned for a second time. So we're looking for a 755 western base with the way this is aligned. And so we put our cursor here and we measure over and we run again. You're not getting perfect, but as you can see, that's 755 feet right there. Um, we'll undo that. Run back here real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there are some other cool measurements. So you've got 719 feet being the one of the sides. Run back and put our cursor up here at the apex of the pyramid, measure it down, and we are roughly 719 feet. Again, it's not perfect, but it's god awful close. I'm not sure how that was a little bit more off than usual, and that's probably because I didn't get it. I'm a little too far out. So we'll go right here to the apex, and we'll measure down, bring it back in, and we're gonna get. Oh man, thing is moving really slow and glitchy. But you got about 719 feet, and the what we're coming through is a really cool break in the old wall that runs along Richmond Road, and actually where this driveway comes in on the backside of the original historic campus. You have two great statues of King William and Queen Mary. So we've made our base, our sides. Another one that's pretty interesting is, I mean, they're all interesting, and it is completely encoded all the way through. So what we'll look at now is kind of the flat side number, and that's 611 feet. And so again, if we start up here at our apex and go straight down, what do you know? You run right at 611 feet. Um, and now what's really cool is, so say you were to stand on the, if you had a way to stand on the floor of the pyramid and measure straight up to the apex, you'd end up with 481 feet. Okay. So what's really cool is if you look right here, this right here is it's a bell tower now. That they use in a lot of like kind of ceremony. I know they ring the bell when go figure, they do this cool fall. It's almost right on the fall equinox when they have kind of freshman orientation and everybody meets out here on the in the Ren Yard. They have some speeches. They ring the bell in this bell tower, and then everybody runs through or walks through the I guess portico is what it would be called, something like that. They walk through here out to um, the sunken gardens, and they have a big party. It's really interesting that it. I mean, obviously it's fall, it's school, that's when it starts, but it's really interesting that it's this kind of ceremonial thing. It happens very close to the fall equinox. So anyway, but this bell tower hasn't always been a bell tower. It was originally um, the first astronomical observatory in the colonies. It That's what it was used for. So the exact type of place that you would use to set up navigation and find points on the Earth and things like that, study the stars, um, it was right here. So make this the base or the floor of the Great Pyramid, and you're going to measure from here up, and that measurement was 481. Excuse me. So as you can see, you measure straight up to the apex. We're looking for 481. Wait, and get a little bit closer. This thing is moving real slow, but 481. All right, I'm gonna get off this in just a second after I show you one more thing, and that is that um, all those measurements up to um, the apex there are measurements of what they estimate the full pyramid would be, but we all know that there is the top portion is missing from it. And what's really interesting is not only back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, they built this campus between two roads that was a perfect encode of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but that to the base of Duke of Gloucester Street, which only had a couple of buildings, including the church on it at that time, is the full pyramid. Um, but what is currently there is only 449 feet. So 480 feet is the full estimated pyramid with the capstone and the missing portion on it. 449 feet, which leaves a difference of 31 feet, is what it actually measures to if you measured it today with the missing portion, right? So we're looking for a difference of 31 feet. If we go back to our Google Earth and zoom in a little bit, and we put a point here, and we run down roughly 31 feet, what you end up with is this is the area here that where the actual Ren yard starts. Um, so from the actual landscaping of the Ren yard, the grass portion, um, that is a perfect measurement of the pyramid with no capstone, how it sits today. And then if you measure to the very beginning of Duke of Gloucester Street, you end up with what it would be, exactly what it would be if the capstone and the missing portion were still on the pyramid. So all that's interesting. Could that be a coincidence? Absolutely. It seems pretty wild that the astronomical bell tower observatory situation and the sides and all that would coincidentally just fall into place. But it's a triangle. I'm sure there's other triangles that are accidentally, um, you know, you know, cityscape triangles that accidentally get close to. I think this is a little bit more than close to. It's pretty dead on. But what really blew me away was what I did next. Once I found this encode of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I was like, well, let's see where some of these straight lines go. And the very first one that I started with was I started down here at the bottom right of the pyramid, and I drew a line. And to be honest with you, it in my wildest dreams, I wouldn't have guessed that it went to the Great Pyramid of Giza. But as it turns out, um, that's exactly where it goes. And not only does it point directly to the Great Pyramid of Giza, but when you get there, to be honest with you, I can probably just fly straight to it instead of, nope, took me back the other way. Let's see if it'll, no. So I just wasted a bunch of time. Sorry, guys. We'll just run back over there. Um, anyway, so it goes all the way to the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Giza Plateau. And once we get down here, you'll see that not only does it run straight to the Great Pyramid of Giza, but if we orientate our map the same way, what it does is it runs down the exact same side of the pyramid. It's not, over here in the middle of either of any of these sides. It runs straight down a corner side right onto the top. Now, if you put the same line here, it won't intersect with a perfect if you put it on this pyramid or the Sphinx or um the necropolis or anything like that, you won't intersect as perfectly as you do with when you come back here in Williamsburg to what I call the William and Mary pyramid, with exactly where the top is. You end up, if you put it on any other point on the Giza Plateau, you'll end up with it pretty dang close. It'll be over here, maybe over here, kind of on the corner. But that's that's kind of the thing that sold me on I wasn't completely crazy with this encode of the Great Pyramid of Giza being here on the historic campus of William and Mary. Now, what does that mean? Well, we all know that Freemasons and their predecessors and organizations that were the precursors to Masonry were have a sort of fetishize and venerate Egyptian culture and Egyptian Enlightenment kind of ideals. Um, and it's my contention that the campus of William and Mary and the school in general was sort of a Freemasonic project and has been sort of stewarded by them all the way up until present day, if that makes any sense. So we'll get off the pyramid now. I'm going to show you something new. Now that we're, like an hour in. But the next thing that occurred to me when looking at an overhead of the campus of William and Mary was I was listening to some podcasts and people were talking a lot in the conspiracy world about the Tree of Life. I think I had seen something on Oak Island, some Tree of Life alignments and configurations and other cityscapes and whatnot. And they all look pretty close. And So I was looking at an overhead of William and Mary, and I was like, good God, like if this is what if these buildings are set up the way I think they are, I think the tree of life that William and Mary has is more perfect than any of the ones I've seen anywhere else. So if we go to this next slide, what we've got is over here, we've got the um, Kabbalistic tree of life. And what it is, and Lord knows I am not an expert in Kabbalah. I actually talked to a rabbi who is familiar with Kabbalah and another researcher, and they both said that Kabbalah is one of those things that you shouldn't learn halfway. And so I haven't delved as deep into it as I would like because I'm a little bit eh, not sure I want to open up some of those doors. But on the surface, um, what it represents is pathways to God and specifically pathways to the different aspects of God. So each of these circles is a sephiro or sephirot, and they are different aspects of God. And then these pathways in between are pathways from each aspect to God. And just a quick overview, you've got this is actually these definitions come from Kabbalah for Dummies, which was really helpful for me. Um, but what you have is Malkuth is kind of where it begins. Um, and Malkuth is sovereignty, rule, ultimate receptacle. It's the realization of potential and the divine presence. The biblical personality associated with Malkut is David. Anyway, so each of these Sephirot has their own definition, their own aspects, their own, in some cases, some explanations, different elements that correspond with each. Now, in a lot of Tree of Life configurations, you won't see this one here. This is Da'ath or Dot. I'm not exactly sure of the Hebrew pronunciation. And here it's and this will come in. This will be important later on. Um, but it says dot is the accumulation of that which is known. So the accumulation of that which is known, which is, I think, a pretty important Sephiroth or aspect. Um, it is the abstract ascertaining of facts and the crystallization of awareness in terms of conclusions. So you can make your own judgment about that. I've also heard this particular Sephiroth, because it's hidden, to have more of a dark and negative. I've heard it explained that it has a negative connotation. I couldn't find that, but it is strange that it is kind of it's not on every tree of life at all. Tippereth is another one that'll be important, or Tiferet. This is another one that'll be probably the most ultimately important out of the whole tree of life configuration. This pillar here, that'll become important once I show you the William and Mary tree of life. And then ultimately, Kether or Keter, which is the crown. Um, I'll be able to show you some really interesting facts and how, again, confirmation bias. You can look at, this overhead map of the campus of William and Mary and go, yeah, it's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven buildings in that general shape. But then considering who was responsible for placing these buildings here and the sunken garden there, it starts to become undeniable, I think, personally. And then where some of these pathways lead to elsewhere on the map that this was not an accident and it's not just a random configuration of buildings that happens to form a tree of life. So, without further ado, I'm going to open up the William and Mary tree of life. Now, you can go and look at 100 different pictures of 100 trees of life. Um, and they're all pretty exact to what I've got laid out here. Okay. Now you can go to other cityscapes and places where people claim tree of life configurations. And from what I have seen, they do not work out as perfect as this one does. As you can see, we'll look at this here and then we'll go back to the PowerPoint and you can see how very perfect, including right down to this five-sided star, um, where the Da'at would be the Sephiroth here, and Tiferet, which means beauty, I believe, is dead center of the sunken garden in William and Mary. Now, what is, again, I want to give some context to why I started my tree of life where I started it, which can seem kind of arbitrary at first glance. So you can see that my Kether or my crown lands right here, which could seem kind of arbitrary, and unless you look at what the original idea for the building was, which was this oblong square, which is a Masonic term meaning rectangle. So this is a this this is actually Thomas Jefferson's blueprint of the construction that he wanted to do to finish what was already there and finish what the original intention of the Wren building was, which is this slight rectangle square. But what that shows is that the middle of it would be very close to this point. Again, it's not exact. If the line was here, it wouldn't make much, if the beginning point was here, it wouldn't make much difference. If it was dead on here, it wouldn't make much difference. It's all the alignments still line up. Now, what else is, well, let me get off on a tangent real quick just because I included this slide. And then we'll run back to the tree of life. Um, because I mentioned Thomas Jefferson, I just wanted to also mention a man named George Wythe. Now, George Wythe, um, gosh, I say far too much. You should probably drink every time I say um, and then go to rehab. So, George Wythe was Thomas Jefferson's biggest mentor. He created a lifelong love for the Enlightenment and for Sir Francis Bacon, for Freemasonry, I think, in Thomas Jefferson, architecture and art. He lived off and on with George Wythe, who lived right next door to the Bruton Parish Church. Um, George Wythe was the first professor of law at William and Mary. He basically created the law department at William and Mary. He also created some pretty important seals. The seal that he created for William and Mary, one of its earliest seals, is this one here on the left. And if we zoom in, you see some really interesting aspects of this seal. Up here on the top, you can see that I changed the page. That, let me zoom back out a little bit. Well, if it'll let me. Okay. So we zoom back out a little bit. You can see that this building, it's supposed to be a college building, but the closer you look, you realize that there are some interesting aspects to it. Up here, you can clearly see that it is the Temple of Minerva. Minerva is I believe that would be the Latin Roman version of Athena, yes. Athena would be Greek, and Minerva would be the Roman goddess, the equivalent goddess, which we'll get to in the seal on the right a little bit later. But a strange thing to write on the top of a nondescript college building. What also jumps out is the number 357, which isn't explicitly written anywhere on here, but what you do have is you've got three finials on the top of this on the top of this building. One, two, three. You have five arched windows and door. Now you've got 3, 6, 9, 12 openings in the front of this building, but five of them are arched. The arch is important in Freemasonry, especially when you get to it's a important piece of symbolism in Freemasonry. So I think it's significant that these five openings are arched, especially you get to things like the Royal Arch degree of Freemasonry. And then you've got four pillars and seven steps to equal, I'm sorry, four pillars and three steps to equal a grand total of seven. So you've got three finials, five arched windows, four pillars, and three, making seven. So that's 3, 5, and 7, which is the a very important number, 3, 5, and 7 in Freemasonry because it stands for the first three degrees of Masonry. It then stands for the five human senses and then the seven sacred sciences. And then when you look at these pillars and these steps, they actually have the seven sacred sciences written, engraved on them, which I think is a clear nod to the ideals of Masonry. You also have a sun, another piece of Masonic symbolism, directly up here on the top. And then down here below, you have a phoenix rising, another huge piece of Freemasonic symbolism. Now we'll go back to the Temple of Minerva being Athena, Athena being Minerva, Minerva being Athena. And the other really important famous seal that the same fella, George Wythe, Thomas Jefferson's mentor, created was the Virginia seal, Sic Semper Tyrannis, death thus to tyrants, I believe. And featured on the Virginia seal, you have Athena, foot on a tyrant, and holding her spear and her. You know it's Athena because she's wearing her helmet and she's holding her spear. Okay, and Athena was known to wear a helmet, a goddess of war and knowledge, and she was known to shake her spear of knowledge. I believe the saying goes, "Shake her spear of knowledge in the face of ignorance," or um, and so it's where many people believe possibly that the name Shakespeare came from. And when you learn about George Wythe and how obsessed he and Jefferson were with Shakespeare and the Shakespeare-like inscriptions on the tombstones in in the Bruton Chapel churchyard that Court Lindahl talks about, the theory that there's some sort of Shakespeare manuscript hidden at William and Mary. I don't exactly believe that, but that is a running theme coming from a woman whose husband was probably one of the most learned esoteric men in the country, maybe ever. Um, and that she decoded some Shakespeare works, tombstones, to come up with her theory. It makes it a little bit more interesting. So anyway, we'll run back to the Tree of Life. Okay. Now, what's interesting here is I'll just run through really quick what um, the places, the points that my Tree of Life goes. And there should be a line right here coming down from the bottom of this point to right here. But when you save these alignments, like if you zoom in, you can kind of see pieces of the line. Anyway, um, when you save these, they kind of go under the trees in the buildings for some reason. I'm not sure why they don't just leave the lines over top of everything, but they don't. Anyway, so it should start right here. Okay. And that first Sephiroth would be Malkuth or Malkut. Um, and that lands on the Crimdel Pond. What's interesting about that, and we've talked about this before, is this pond was created by damming up a creek that runs all the way down here and all the way out to the James River, right to the James Fort. And the creek that this pond was dammed up from was originally called Archer's Hope, and it was the original. It was Sir Gabriel Archer in 1607 on one of the three ships, who was kind of the big swinging, you know what, of that crew of guys who came over in 1607. It was, he wanted the original Jamestown, the original James Fort, to be on this piece of land where the college ended up. He wanted it to be at the end of this creek that they explored first before they placed the James Fort where it was. The problem was that it wasn't deep enough. Supposedly, I don't know why they didn't, but he was so adamant that he wanted it to be there that that creek became known as Archer's Hope well into I believe the 1800s, maybe even the turn of the century, when they changed it to the name of it to College Creek. So it's an interesting piece of history as to where this little pond that sits right here. It's a really important piece of the campus. There's a really beautiful bridge that goes over top of it. People do backflips off of it. Supposedly, if you kiss on it, that relationship will last forever. Blah blah blah. Whatever. It's imbued with a lot of superstition and meaning at that college for students. Um, the next point would be right here, and that is going to be the Sephiroth of Yesod, which means foundation. And where this sits is interesting. And it's one of the things that threw me off and made me believe 100% that this was all confirmation bias and I shouldn't pursue it anymore, because where it sits is on the geology department's geological kind of rock garden. Now, it was placed here in 2010, this piece of land right here. And one of the reasons I got back into this tree of life study, this configuration on the campus of William and Mary, is I kind of abandoned it because this is such a modern aspect of the campus of William and Mary, this 2010 rock garden. Until I had a private conversation with Mr. Court and I was like, is this crazy? I mean, this was put here in 2010, and I really do have this underlying suspicion that Freemasonry and just adepts of these principles have been involved in the college. Maybe not these big overlords who control every aspect, but I've always had this, sneaking suspicion that somebody in the know has been involved in this college, in this campus in particular, since its inception. And it'll get even more interesting where this point lands, because the center point where it has to land for it to be a perfect symmetrical tree of life is right here. And it's not a great picture, obviously, because it's on Google Earth, but this that I'm circling right now is this geological rock garden that is attributed to the geology department, which, funny enough, this line right here goes to another Sephiroth, which is the building that the geology department is housed in. But what's really interesting is that these are all gigantic, nondescript boulders and gravel with little nameplates saying what they are and kind of where they came from, and how they're specific to Virginia and or the region. And then there's one out of place stone, and it's huge. It's right here, and you, you can't really tell from this, but if you stand there, it is like I said, these are all boulders, that picked up off the side of a mountain or dug up, from somewhere. This one here, where this Sephiroth has to land to make it symmetrical, is a perfectly hewn, quarried piece of, I believe it's granite. Um, and again, granite is super important in a lot of these large um, stone structures because of I believe because of the amount of quartz that's in it. Um, anyway, I don't know enough about geology or geomancy to be able to wax poetic on that. But I find it interesting also that, again, Yasad or Jasad, however you pronounce it, means foundation, and that it just happens to fall directly on a rock garden with a bunch of boulders, foundation boulders. I find that interesting. So I'll take a quick um, overview again and just show you a couple more interesting aspects of this tree of life configuration. And that's that in the Kabbalistic tree of life, like I said, they are pathways to different aspects of God, right? And you've got these two pillars here, and they're made up of three Sephiroth per, or Sephiro per pillar. Okay. Now, the left side pillar is considered the feminine side. The right side pillar is considered the masculine side. And they end at the top, the final Sephiroth, which is Keter or Ketar or Kether, here, which means crown. And it is the feminine and the masculine married under the crown. So it is the marriage of the masculine and the feminine. And we roll back to the William and Mary tree of life, and these three buildings here. And now remember, feminine, masculine, crown. Okay. And what you have, excuse me, is the original female housing. They were housed here in it really was these two buildings. This building and this building were built later. But here on this side, on the feminine pillar, is where originally the females of the campus were housed. And what's interesting about that is that the Order of the Eastern Star, which is the kind of female arm of Freemasonry, and I'm going to get these dates backwards confused, but they're very, very close. The Order of the Eastern Star was created between like 1912 and 1916 or thereabouts. And go figure, the College of William and Mary went co-ed within that same date range as well. Now, was that early turn of the century? Um, the result of suffrage and women actually having rights and being able to go to college? Yeah, to a certain degree. But I also think that there were a lot of anyway. So you have your feminine housing here. You've got your masculine, go figure. Again, the men were housed on this side. And what's really cool is they both end up and our crown Sephira of the Tree of Life here at William and Mary is the original Wren building, right? And so if the Tree of Life ends at the crown and it is the marriage of the masculine and the feminine, and this Sephira is representative of the crown, God, the crown. What's interesting is that the name of this college is the College of William and Mary, quite literally the marriage of masculine and feminine under the crown, a King William and a Queen Mary. Um, and it was, this building was named after Sir Christopher Wren. Um, Anyway, so those are very interesting aspects to me. Now, looking back at all this, this tree of life configuration fitting so perfectly within the campus of William and Mary, having your masculine, your feminine side, your foundation Sephiroth sitting on top of the rock garden, um, yada yada yada. It's really great, right? It got me stoked. But again, these could just be buildings in a random shape until you look at. Uh-oh. Okay, we're back here. Okay, so until you look at who was responsible for this part of the campus of William and Mary. Now, in the early 1700s, you had the Christopher Wren building, you had the Brafferton building, and you had the President's House, right? Um, and then there was another building here for a little while and another building here for a little while. But these buildings around the outside came in and around the 1920s when the Rockefellers came in to renovate Colonial Williamsburg. You know, that point very, very close in time to when Marie Bauer Hall claims that there was some secret vault hidden on Duke of Gloucester Street around the Bruton Parish. Is that's right around the same time that the Rockefellers swoop into this town, um, buy out the whole town, buy everybody's houses. You know, they everybody moves out and they create this living museum. Well, when that was kind of being discussed or on the table, the Rockefellers also, almost as like a proof of concept, if I'm remembering correctly, uh, helped renovate the Wren building and the grounds around William and Mary to uh, sort of as a proof of concept. Now, when they did this, the guy that they tapped, the architect that they tapped to place these buildings, and particularly to lay out the sunken garden, this really great, beautiful feature of the campus, was a guy named Charles M. Robinson. We've talked about him before. He's built a lot of stuff in Virginia, particularly schools and big kind of municipal buildings. But in particular, he rebuilt the number six lodge in Williamsburg with his own money around the same time and then gave it to the Freemasons of the number six lodge in Williamsburg. And he also built the mosque, which is at the time in the early 20s was the largest Masonic meeting hall in North America. It's huge. It's still used. It's called the Altria Theater today. It's still got most of its original artwork and kind of interior architecture. It looks like a big mosque. It was a big kind of Shriner Masonic convention hall. It's huge. It's where you go see really big bands and stuff in Richmond, Virginia today. So he was responsible for that. The Williamsburg Masonic Lodge, which was gone, I think. I think he rebuilt it. It had fallen into such disrepair. The Masons of Williamsburg had kind of abandoned it, and it was no longer being used for meetings. And when he came into Williamsburg and was involved with William and Mary and the Rockefeller renovation of Colonial Williamsburg, he, um, from his own pocket, rebuilt the hall and gave it back to the number six lodge of Masons in Williamsburg. And I say all that to say this, that you can't find a lot on Charles, the architect Charles M. Robinson. I mean, you can find a ton on him and his architecture, but you can't really find whether or not he was a Mason. But I think what he did and who he was tapped by and the buildings that he built were make it pretty clear that he was. And you find that a lot with Williamsburg in particular, or I'm sorry, with Williamsburg, and then also with William and Mary in particular. You find a lot where somebody built something or did something for the school, but you can't find that they were a Mason. But what you can find is like the next generation, their son was the worshipful master or the master of the Grand Lodge of the state, or in the case of Lord Botetourt, who will be interesting in this conversation later, um, that he built the Master Mason's chair. Now you can't find that Lord Botetourt because so early on in Freemasonry. You can't find records that he was a Mason, but he had the Master Mason's chair built for the number six lodge, and then given to them, which they still have to this day. It's pretty incredible. So anyway, that part is really interesting about this tree of life. That Kabbalah. If you read, God, I'm gonna forget his name. Confederate Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. Sorry. If you read Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, um, who was a Confederate general, and basically kind of revamped and rewrote and just kind of solidified the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in America. He's kind of like the godfather of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in America. He explicitly states in his book, Morals and Dogma, which is kind of the textbook for the Scottish Rite, that Kabbalah is everything kind of distills down to Kabbalah. Um, Now, there's several ways you can look at Kabbalah. It is Jewish mysticism on its surface, um, but the further you dig down into its history, it seems to be a little bit. It's got some darkness to it, in that it didn't come around until after the destruction of the Second Temple, and kind of a reasoning for Kabbalah is that it came from Babylonian mysticism, and that once the Israelites no longer had a temple to sacrifice in, because within the Hebrew Judaic religion, there can be no forgiveness of sins without the shedding of blood. Now, for um, those with a Christian worldview, we see Christ as the shedding of blood and no longer need a shedding of blood to wash away sins. But for them, they're now faced with their temple is gone, and that's where you have, it's where you go to make your sacrifice and to be forgiven of sin. And they're faced with the temple being destroyed and no longer having that. And sort of this consensus is that then that's when they reached back in time and created this kind of form of mysticism, almost as a way to get their power back. Again, I am not a Kabbalistic scholar. I have a surface level understanding of Kabbalah. Um, but if you're interested in it, there's tons of resources out there, but it goes so deep that you almost have to become a scholar of Kabbalah to understand it. So back to Oak Island. William and Mary and Oak Island. I should probably talk a little bit about the similarities. As I'm watching Oak Island and reading about it and whatnot and digging it, not so much anymore because I think they're just stringing us along for views. But as I'm digging into it, I start seeing all these like crazy similarities between this research that I'm doing in um, Williamsburg. And so just a precursor. The reason that Oak Island is called Oak Island is because that it sits in Mahone Bay in Nova Scotia. Okay. Now, Nova Scotia, or I'm sorry, there's about 400 islands in Mahone Bay in Nova Scotia, where this little island of Oak Island sits. Now, the reason it's called Oak Island is because it was at one time covered in red oaks and live oaks. Okay. Both of those are oak trees that don't grow above the Mason-Dixon, if I'm understanding this correctly. And this is a little earlier part of my research, but I believe that that's the case. Regardless, neither of these oaks grew on any of the other 400 islands in Mahone Bay. Um, these two trees were absolutely unique to that island, which would suggest that they were planted there purposely as almost like a marker, um, for whatever was done there, hidden there, as a safe base, as almost a possibly a almost like a safety deposit box for, I don't know, Freemasons, Templars, Jacobites, whoever it may be. Um, and they actually have done recent, in the last decade or so, they've done studies and found that yes, it was covered in oaks, these particular oaks, and that they were not native, and that they did not grow on any of the other 400 islands in Mahone Bay, and they were that they were what's the word? That they were planted there, but that's not the word that I'm looking for. Cultivated. That they were cultivated there. What's interesting about that is that at William and Mary, the first two types of trees that were purposely cultivated on the historic campus were the red oak and the live oak, also pin oaks and one other oak. But I found that interesting. Again, speculative, maybe, but interesting. Then in my research, digging back into the history of Jamestown and Williamsburg, you start looking at these governors, right? And what you find is there's a fella early on in the history of Jamestown and Williamsburg. Um, oh, let me get to this first. I'm sorry. So, 1607, these you know, in a from a company that Sir Francis Bacon sat on the board of, 1607, they send over these guys to figure out and settle the New World. The whole Sir Gabriel Archer, Christopher Newport, um, uh, John Smith, Pocahontas trip, right? And so this is in 1607. They come over. They have a really hard time. At first, they're um, rebuffed by the natives, and then John Smith works out some deals with the natives, and the natives help, and then they fight, and then they help, and then they fight, and then they starve, and then they die, and then they uh, resupply, and all this happens in the course of 5, 6 years. Um, and but in the middle of all that, in the middle of these guys clawing and scratching to create this colony in Virginia, 1613 rolls around, and they decide, all right, we're barely hanging on by a thread here in Jamestown, but it's important to go take Nova Scotia back from the French. And so they send Captain Samuel Argall up from Jamestown in 1613. Now, again, they were constantly having to resupply, send supply missions, and we'll get into some of those later, but constantly having to send these supply missions. Two of them in 1608, a really important one in 1609, and I believe another one in 1610 or 1611, just because everybody kept dying off. I mean, they would they would come in, they'd fight amongst one another, they'd fight with the natives, they'd all die, they'd all starve. I mean, they've found evidence of cannibalism from the excuse me, from the starving time, in the ruins of the James Fort. But in the middle of all that, they sent they split their forces. sent this Captain Samuel Argall up to Nova Scotia, and he was successful in taking Nova Scotia back from the French. So Maine and then parts of present day Canada and Nova Scotia. Um, so they have that back. I find that interesting that it's that far apart, but they're also securing, um, bordering territory for the Plymouth colony and whatnot. But I do find it interesting that they were so hot and heavy to get up to Nova Scotia and take it back from the French, which is where Oak Island sits. I'm not saying it's 100% um, that it's 100% connected, but it does seem interesting, especially because, again, here on the screen, this action was part of a broader effort by the Jamestown colony to secure its territory against French encroachment and to establish English dominance in the region. Again, Virginia stretched all the way up the East Coast. So when they say um, French encroachment, that could mean all the way up to Maine. Um, Specifically, Argall targeted Saint Savior, a Jesuit mission in Maine, and Port Royal, a French settlement in Nova Scotia. What's interesting about that is right where William and Mary sits in the 1580s, before this whole 1607 um, mission to Virginia, to the New World. There was a Jesuit mission right there between the York and the James River, right where what became Middle Plantation and the campus of William and Mary and the Bruton Parish Church sat, right? And it got destroyed, and that is a really great story that we'll probably do a whole show on. Um, but the cliff notes on that is the Jesuits uh, were there, and they stole a native and then took him back to Spain with them and taught him Spanish in a attempt to then bring him back to the colony in the later part of the 1580s, and basically use him as a way to make nice with his natives that he was stolen from, native families and tribes that he was stolen from, and to also convert them to Christianity, as if that hadn't, you know, been tried and failed in the past already. But basically, what happened is as soon as they brought him back over here, he ran away and then they killed them all. But again, what's interesting about that is just, a couple decades later, the English come over here. And like I said, the big swing and dong of that mission was a guy named Sir Gabriel Archer, who, at a time when it wasn't okay to be Catholic in England, he is a knight, Sir Gabriel Archer, in charge of this important mission. And he comes over here, and it seems that he was a crypto Catholic, that he was a secret Catholic, at least secret to the English, on the English mainland. But when they found his grave underneath the original James Fort Church, he was buried with a Catholic reliquary, a little tiny lead box that they inside found pieces of parchment, pieces of bone, and a vial of liquid, which most likely was holy water. And so this was a Catholic guy who was really dead set on putting the fort right in this general area where up this creek where William and Mary ended up later on, almost 100 years later, almost where William and Mary ended up, so much so that that creek was called Archer's Hope. Blah blah blah. I'm going off down rabbit holes, but that's why this research is so interesting, because it spans such a long period of time, such interesting people, and anyway. So the connections with Oak Island, as far as us going up there and taking Nova Scotia back. Then there is Governor Francis Nicholson. Francis Nicholson was a colonial governor who served as the governor of both Virginia and Nova Scotia. He was the governor of Virginia from 1698 to 1705. That is right in the exact time that the campus of William and Mary was being built, and again from 1690 to 1692. Now, just after, um, okay, so just after his stint as the governor of Virginia, ending in 1705, he becomes the governor of, you guessed it, Nova Scotia from 1712 to 1715. Now, there's another period earlier than that when he served as a lieutenant governor of the Dominion of New England, based in Boston, in in Massachusetts, in that colony. Okay. What's interesting about that is one of the largest, kind of widely held theories on what was hidden um, on Oak Island is possibly the treasure of Sir William Phips. Sir William Phips served as the royal governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, the Dominion of New England and the Massachusetts Bay Colony aren't two different things. They're the same place, ruled from the same area. It's just that when Nicholson was the governor, it was called the Dominion of New England. And when Phips was the governor, he was it was called Massachusetts Bay Colony from 1692 to 1694. Um, and so it was just kind of a rebranding. But his big claim to fame is before he became the royal governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Sir William Phips, who comes from seemingly very um, uh, regular salt of the earth um, beginnings, becomes a sailor, then becomes a captain, and then he, as a privateer, goes down. I want to say in the Gulf, but maybe off of it might be off of the actual eastern coast of Florida. But there was a Spanish treasure galleon that crash landed that kind of a bunch of people knew about, but nobody was able to find it. It was filled with like, I want to say it was like 6 tons of Spanish silver that was being taken from, the Caribbean or South America and being brought back to Spain. And it got caught in a storm and it sunk off the coast of Florida somewhere. So he becomes a privateer, gets a ship, goes down there. He finds it. Okay. And this is little less than a decade before he becomes the royal governor of Massachusetts Bay. But it is right in that time that Francis Nicholson was the royal governor of Massachusetts, kind of Bay Colony, right? So I don't know that on the Curse of Oak Island they've ever put this part together, but my idea is that there was a close enough overlap between Nicholson and Phipps. One that um, Nicholson had been so he was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay. Right. Jesus, this is crazy. So he was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony right after Sir William Phipps finds this 6 tons of silver. Side note, he Phipps is supposed to take the silver to England and get his cut, but then the rest goes to the crown. Well, when he shows up in England, he's only got 3 tons, while everybody knew that there were 6 tons originally sunk. Now, the story was they weren't able to get it all, and then when they went back to get the rest, they couldn't find it. The idea is that Phipps got it all, but that he stashed it somewhere, okay, and then took just the 3 tons back to England, okay. I think it lends a little credence to the fact that Nicholson is the governor right around the time or just after Phipps finds the Concepcion and all this silver. Okay. And then he leaves Massachusetts Bay. Nicholson leaves Massachusetts Bay Colony to go become the governor of Virginia. And Sir William Phipps goes from rags to riches, you know, normal, uh, working class guy to sailor to privateer to captain to finding all this silver to taking over as the governor from Francis Nicholson. We're wondering where this other 3 tons of silver went, and the idea is that he hid it at Oak Island. It's a big theory. And I find it interesting somebody so close in job and time to Phipps then also becomes the um later becomes the governor of Nova Scotia. Um I don't know. There weren't many places in the colonies. There was kind of Nova Scotia, the Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and then Virginia Colony. There's really only like 3 or 4, areas. But I do find that interesting. I think it lends a little credence to maybe the fact that maybe Phipps, maybe Nicholson were in cahoots. Also, I read somewhere interesting that nothing is known about Nicholson's family except for that he had a sister in Canada and her married. The only thing we know about her is that she lived in Canada and that her married name was Phipps. Now, supposedly Phipps, Sir William Phipps, was married to a woman in Massachusetts Bay Colony, and she was the love of his life. But I don't know. Maybe he had a side family up there in Nova Scotia. I don't know. I've gotten way off the point. So those are some of the connections between Oak Island and Williamsburg. Also, you can see over here that the artifacts that have been found on Oak Island, you've obviously got these pre-colonial era stuff, but the vast majority of everything that they've found on on Oak Island is between the 1750s and the 1790s. The things of significance that aren't from like searchers on the island. Um, and I think that lends credence to one that that island had been used for a number of years as sort of a drop off place to hide things, sort of a safety deposit box, which I think early on existed for different groups in the know, kind of all over the world. Okay, I'm going to get back into it and get back into some of these alignments. One of the things that really interested me with Oak Island was this configuration called Nolan's Cross, and we'll get into that more momentarily. But within Nolan's Cross, a guy named Petter Amundsen came on the show. Uh, Nolan's Cross was this configuration of one, two, three, four, five, six gigantic, like tons, like stones that were like hand carved into these cone shapes that were laid out with these measurements here to form this perfect cross where well they found this they mapped it out or whatever. They weren't exactly sure what it meant, but then this man named Petter Amundsen from I want to say Norway, maybe Sweden. I don't know. He's a Norse looking fellow. He came out with a documentary where he had some theories about Shakespeare and decoding Shakespeare and Bacon and Oak Island. And with this Nolan's Cross, he created a tree of life, which had some areas or some alignments from that cross pointing to different areas on the island that sure enough, when he pointed to those areas, they went and dug and searched around those areas, and then they found some interesting aspects and markers and things like that. And so that got me thinking. I was like, well, I see all these connections between Oak Island and Williamsburg. Um, let me start doing some alignments with my um, tree of life. And so I did. And what I found was if you connect the Sephiroth here at Yule Hall through the crown, so that's going to be the Koshma, Kashma, the intuitive grasp and the intuitive knowledge. It is also that which distinguishes and creates through Keter or Kether, which is the crown. If you draw a line from here through here, what you end up with is a line that goes all the way. Well, it didn't take it all the way for me, but it goes all the way and lands on Oak Island. And it doesn't stop there. And we can get into that in a little while as well. Um, but again, you draw an alignment with those uh, top two Sephiroth, and it specifically it lands right here. Now, I'll take you back and show how it goes through the Williamsburg tree of life. But what's really interesting is that where it lands in relation to the Oak Island Nolan's cross. Now, this is that cross configuration that I was talking about. And the line from the Williamsburg tree of life through those two Sephiroth all the way to Oak Island lands right where you can actually see at least the area. This is the exact alignment of Nolan's Cross on Oak Island, which I found interesting. Obviously, if we go back to the Tree of Life, you can see it's the purple line here that it runs from Yule Hall straight through. So this Sephiroth to this Sephiroth. And I mean, again, you can't get these perfect, or some might be able to. I don't have the patience, but it's pretty dead on where the crown Sephiroth, I believe, sits on the campus of William and Mary. I'm trying to straighten this thing up and it ain't doing it for me. There we go. Um, Now, talking about Nolan's Cross. And these things just layer on top. And again, I know this is starting to sound like Pepe Sylvia and Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You gotta find Pepe Sylvia. But with like, red yarn everywhere. But I started looking for possibly Nolan's Cross at William and Mary. And what I found was this right here. Now, these are my, over in Oak Island, it's 6 distinct hand hewn, multiple ton stones that were placed specifically where they were placed. Here, you have, remember me talking about Lord Batatat. This is a statue right here of Lord Batatat um, that has moved several times, but has always been in this general area. Um, you've got, so that's one of my stones. Basically, the front door of the Sir Christopher Wren building, the perimeter of those very important roads, uh, Richmond Road, Jamestown Road. Um, I will show you how interesting the other 2 points are. So you got 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point, 5 point, 6 point. And I can show you the measurements. Go back to the Nolan's Cross measurements. You've got it's 145 feet from the first stone to the cross section. And when you go to the William and Mary cross that I have, um, you get from oh no. Oh, I don't want that. That was gross. There we go. Let's get some color back in there. All right. So if you go from Lord Botetourt, again, he's the guy who it's hard to confirm if he was a Freemason because it was so early on, but we do know that he is the one who commissioned the Master Mason's chair for the number 6 lodge in um, Williamsburg. And if you measure from him to the front door of the Sir Christopher Wren building, you land right almost exactly around 145 feet, which, if you remember, is the exact measurement from this stone to this stone. And then we have each arm of the cross is 360 feet from the center. Now, if we go back to our William and Mary Nolan's cross from the front door, roughly to the edges of these the outside perimeter of these roads, you wind up right around, why is that? Go away. Right around 360 degrees. There you go. You can kind of see it. Again, over to this one. Or I'm sorry, not 360 degrees, 360 feet. Again, you get roughly around 360 feet. Again, so that's 360 feet from the center down each arm. This is when it gets really cool. What you're looking at here is from the cross section to the next stone, you get 429 feet. Okay. Now, at William and Mary, you measure from the cross section. Okay. I don't know why this William and Mary thing, it's messing up. You can't see the dang. Go away. That was never there before. All right, let me see what's going on here. Let me do another measurement. All right, let's see. It's still there. Why is it doing? It's the Illuminati, y'all. They're blocking me from being able to show you the measurements. Anyway, so we'll put a measurement. We'll start it here. And there we go. Now it's going away. Very good. Nope, it's back again. What in the hell? All right. Anyway, down to here. This is crazy. Here, we'll just put, I believe it's right around here. All right. You're killing me, Smalls. I'm sorry about this, guys. I don't know what's going on. It is blocking the measurement here. All right. So you're looking for 429 feet. I swear I'm gonna make this not suck in just a second. I guess we'll start from here. 429 feet. We'll go from here to here. It's roughly 429 feet if that stupid thing would get out of the way. All right. And I know this seems like just a random space in the middle of this sunken garden, but if you remember, there's only two Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. Um, that land in the sunken garden. One is right here, where this the bottom of this five pointed star sits, and the other one is here. So this is a Sephiroth, and this is a Sephiroth. Nowhere else on this sunken garden is there another Sephiroth, except for these two places. And this is exactly where these this is exactly where these two spaces land um, for Nolan's cross configuration. Again, Nolan's cross from this last one that you couldn't see, annoyingly, but promise it was there. Down to the bottom of the cross is 293 feet. We'll see if we can make that work there. We're looking for 293 feet, and it is, again, right around this bottom of this cross. So, just to recap, we have really frustrated about that stupid thing. We have this pyramid that points to the Pyramid of Giza. We have this tree of life that points to Oak Island. It not only points to Oak Island, but it points directly to one of the stones that make up Nolan's cross on the cross of, or on Oak Island. Then you have Nolan's cross, I believe, at William and Mary with Lord Botetourt, the streets. And what really sold me on this was that there's two more points in this cross, and they land directly on these two Sephiroth on the William and Mary Tree of Life. It's a lot more stunning when Google Earth is being a little bit more cooperative. And you can see that a little bit better. But I think it's pretty interesting. It's another one of those things that when they landed on where those two Sephiroth set, that I kind of had to re-examine it and say, maybe there is something there. Okay. So I was going to go through a whole slide about the money pit, but I think I'm going to skip that because I think I'm taking way too much time and this is probably getting boring. Um, what is also interesting was that one of our earlier shows, we did this breakdown of all these crazy 666 measurements of 666 feet on the campus of William and Mary. And again, to recap, um, there's all these. Obviously, the number of the beast is interpreted as 666. Different people in different religions and worldviews look at it as something else. Solomon received 666 talents of silver. Interestingly, silver. Um, as tax or commission. I can't remember who he received it from, but it was like a regular thing. He received 666. It's one of the first places that number pops up in the Bible. And what we found was that it is 666 feet to here, 666 to here, 666 to here, 666 to here. So this diamond is all made of 666 measurements. These two triangles here, literally, they bent these buildings to maintain these measurements. They bent these buildings to maintain the land that these measurements were on. I learned something about a triangle that also um, interacts with the tree of life, and it's called the tetractys or the tetractys, um, or tetrad, or the tetractys of the decad, a triangular figure consisting of 10 points arranged in four rows, 1, 2, 3, and 4 points in each row, which is the geometrical representation of the fourth triangular number. As a mystical symbol, it was very important to the secret worship of Pythagoreanism. There were 4 seasons, and the number was also associated with the planetary motions and music. Okay, so this is a Greek um, mysticism of Pythagoreanism. Um, another thing I need to delve into. I'm familiar with the Pythagorean theory and how Masons and different groups and orders have laid things out using the Pythagorean theorem, and how kind of all of nature kind of conforms to the Pythagorean theorem. I wasn't totally aware that there was sort of this mystery school of Pythagoreanism. Um, but what I did find is that this Tetractus um, became um, folded into Jewish Kabbalah. And the Jewish Kabbalah, the Tetractus or Tetractus is a mystical symbol used by the Pythagoreans and Kabbalah followers. It represents the four classical elements, and is a triangular figure consisting of 10 points arranged in four levels. And this is how it would be configured and visualized within Kabbalah. So I started peeking around William and Mary, and I came up with this. Um, Clearly, we have the triangle, and clearly, we have these two side triangles here. And this is the original land. Now, they originally built William and Mary here, but again, remember me telling you right around here is the end of that creek that Archer wanted the fort to be on. And so this Tetractus lines up pretty well. What I find really, really interesting is that, again, the center point of this figure here is right directly in where this bottom Sephiroth, which means beauty, sits, which is the exact center point of the sunken garden at William and Mary. And then I was curious um, what the measurements were of each individual triangle within these this Tetractus was, and go figure, every side of every triangle within this Tetractus, Tetractus, whatever it is 666 feet. Well, that sent me down another rabbit hole of looking into, measurements that we'd already gone over as far as this 666 encode. And then I found some more on top of it. The garden cross. Again, we looked at this before, and what we found was that the exact measurement going from corner to corner of the sunken garden at William and Mary is exactly 666 feet. And then go figure, its cross point lands directly at that Sephiroth that is, let's see, just so I remember real quick, Tifereth or Tippereth, which means beauty. Um, let's see here. Let's get back down to these Tetractus. Tetractus. We've got a little bit more meaning here. Let's actually go through that real quick. Meaning of the Tetractus in Kabbalah. The Pythagoreans' interpretation of the Tetractus is mathematical in nature. By contrast, its significance to the followers of the ancient Hebrew belief system of the Kabbalah is more mystical. Just like the Pythagoreans, the followers of the Kabbalah also believe that the Tetractus is an illustration of the existence of the way everything is structured in the universe. However, the followers of the Kabbalah have paralleled the Tetractus with the tree of life. In Kabbalah, the 10 points of the Tetractus, I'm just going to call it the T from now on because I know how bad I'm butchering it and how preposterous I sound. So in the Kabbalah, the 10 points of the T represent the 10 Sephiroth, or the 10 faces of God. The followers of Kabbalah have also linked the T with the tetragrammaton, which is the manner by which the name of God is spoken, YHWH, which adding vowels to that gives us Yahweh. In this way, each of the 10 points of the T is substituted with a letter of the tetragrammaton. When the numeric value of each letter is added together, it will yield the number 72. The number 72 is considered holy to the followers of Kabbalah because it signifies the 72 names of God. Now, the Pythagorean meaning of the T, the Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, from which we got the Pythagorean theorem in geometry, once called the T, the symbol of the musical, arithmetic, and geometric ratios upon which the universe is built. For Pythagoras and his followers, each line of the T holds these meanings. First row. The first row is made of a single point. Point is a divine dimension from which everything is created. Because of the nature of this point, it is usually associated with the virtue of wisdom. Second row. The second row is a line connecting 2 points and signifies the first dimension. For the Pythagoreans, the second row represents Nikos, or strife. Strife is the power of division and is often associated with the virtues of movement and impulse. Movement and impulse, in turn, gives birth to courage and strength. The third row, the third row is a line connecting 3 points. It is a representation of the second dimension and of Philotes, or harmony. Harmony is the marriage of physical beauty and mental balance. I'm just seeing this now, and I can't remember if the third row is the one that intersects with the Sephirot that means beauty, but let's go over to this and see. And sure enough, it is. This is the first row. That's 1 point. This is the second row connecting these 2 points. This is the third row. 1, 2, 3. It lands directly within the Sephirot that means beauty. And the third row's Pythagorean meaning, I'll say it again, is the third row is a line connecting 3 points. It is a representation of the second dimension of Philotes, or harmony. Harmony is the marriage of physical beauty and mental balance. I couldn't have landed better if I had figured it out ahead of time. The fourth point, the 4 point, I'm sorry. Fourth row, the 4 points connected in the fourth row indicates the 4 elements of the ancient world: earth, air, fire, and water. Pythagoreans used to swear upon the T in their hopes of attaining purity of mind and harnessing its power. Honestly, the more and more I dig into this campus and its alignments and its configuration, the more and more I believe that it's built as a map to show us things or point to things like the pyramid, to point to things like Oak Island, and possibly, there was a thing, they have geomancy that Court Lindahl studies, um, that has to do with imbuing power into the way things are aligned and set up on the globe. There was another thing called another kind of mindset or system called arithmomancy, and it was literally magic with math. And considering the mystery schools and the different orders and masonry and Rosicrucianism and their obsession with geometry and numbers, um, the more and more I find on this campus, um, the more and more I believe there's a little bit more to what they were trying to do with laying things out like this. Um, Very quickly, just some other, I don't know if it's fun, but interesting 666 alignments. Um, you've got the Wren. So you've got the Sir Christopher Wren building to James Blair, founder of the school. His statue is right here at 666 feet. To the Crimdell Bridge, 666 feet. To his statue of Thomas Jefferson, 666 feet. Back to the Wren Building, 666. Now you've got, I didn't even, oh, here we go. Um, this was an interesting that I found earlier too. I call it the grave bolt from the Wren Building to this very strange little, there's a cemetery, a tiny little graveyard in the middle of campus. It's exactly 666 feet from this, from Kether to the very dead center of that uh, little cemetery. Then going across from that cemetery to Thomas Jefferson, exactly 666 feet. And then from TJ to the Cremdell Bridge, again, 666 feet. Then you've got James Madison to the Tylers, which I'm not saying. Here we go. It's hard to see. Like I said, it's a very Charlie Day here. And this is, I believe, James Madison or maybe Monroe. I can't remember which now, but there's a statue here. It's exactly 666 feet from that statue to there is a group. This is a really strange little piece of the campus too. There is three busts of the Tyler family, three different Tyler family members right here. And actually, if you stand in this little circle and you speak, because of the way the buildings are set up, it's very strange. Your voice sounds disembodied. It doesn't sound like it's coming out of you. It sounds like it's coming from around you. It's just weird. So anyway, I find that one interesting. And again, this is the tip of the iceberg as far as these 666 foot encodes. They're all over this campus, the historic campus. Um, Also, I believe, let me just make sure. But once I had the Tetractus or the Tetractus, however you say it, um, once I found that on the campus of William and Mary, I came over to back to Oak Island. Yeah, and we're not quite there in the presentation yet, so we will pause on talking about that. Um, and we're going to jump back. Yeah, we're back at Oak Island. So the tree that the man Petter Amundsen had created on Oak Island, which pointed to some interesting stuff, wasn't configured exactly where mine is. Um, but this is the exact dimensions of the William and Mary Oak Island, starting from the exactly where it starts on the William and Mary cross. I've transposed that over here to the Oak Island cross, and this is where it lands, which doesn't seem all that interesting until you then transpose the exact dimensions of the Tetractus of William and Mary onto Oak Island, which, and I've tried several different ways. The only way that you can fit this triangle and this configuration of the Tetractus, God, I hate saying it, the T on Oak Island is to put it in this exact 100% exact area. Obviously, you can see here that this was land not too long ago. This is the only part that runs kind of out into the water a little bit, but no matter which direction you put this in, if you don't put it in the same direction on the Tree of Life or the Nolan's Cross that at William and Mary, it will not fit on this island. Again, um, not that interesting until you build a compass on this island. No, this is a north-south. I'm sorry, north-south, east-west, little compass. Um, and I just wanted to get an idea of where the center of Oak Island was. And if you measure, this is the dead center, especially considering that they found workings over here in Sellers Cove that point to a dam being built in this area of um, the island being flooded. This is from here to here and here to here is the exact same um, measurement from east to west, and then north to south. Um, and again, it falls directly the center point, the working center point of Oak Island falls um, right in the middle of the Beauty Sephiroth and right on the Tetricus row that means beauty. I find that significant. I also find significant that right around in this area, you have, well, I guess really this area. And if I ever had the ear of the folks at Oak Island, I would probably, suggest maybe they focus some sort of research in this area here because you do have one of the points of Nolan's Cross. You have the Tetricus point here. You have the east-west compass running through this. You have the Williamsburg line running through this. Um, you also And I'm not totally sure I want to get into too much. Sorry, I know I've petered out a good deal towards the end of this, and I'm losing my voice and coughing like a maniac. Um, but let's throw this in here too. But yeah, I'm running out of steam a little bit, so we might cut this. What I will do is this line here, this is the line going from the top to Sephiroth at William and Mary, and it points directly to the one of the points of Nolan's Cross. The other thing that's really interesting is that if you continue to follow that line, it goes all the way to England. And if you son of a so if you follow this line all the way to ye old England, it winds up falling on a place I've never heard of until I found it. It goes directly on top of the round tower of a building called Bruce Castle. It's now a museum. It was, let's see if I have a slide on this. Nope, nope, nope. Okay, nope. Okay, so we'll just talk about this here real quick. You can see there's this small round tower. Now, this is in the area of England. It's kind of North Londony. Um, you can see it's this it's one of the oldest parts of this property. And this is a big mansion, a stately owned um, mansion. Um, and the cool thing about this particular building and area is that it's called Bruce Castle. And the reason it's called Bruce Castle is that originally The family of Robert the Bruce in particular, actually owned this land right here. Now, once Robert the Bruce gained the independence of Scotland, um, obviously this land was given up, and then it became a manor for different lords. Now, one of the main lords was closely associated with Charles the Second, and I believe it was Charles the Second, maybe Charles the First. Um, no, it must have been Charles the First. I don't remember, but this guy also was close friends with Sir Francis Bacon and leased him property nearby. I found that interesting. I searched all through England where this line goes, and this was the only significant thing that I could find, and I just found it interesting um, with its connection to Robert the Bruce, and that then gives you a connection with the Jacobites and before them the Merovingian bloodline. And I've come further and further to believe that America is really just the rebranding. Maybe not anymore, but up until a certain point of time, I I'm starting to think that we are just a Jacobite. We're built as a Jacobite nation for the Stuart family who could read the writing on the wall after Cromwell's kind of revolution and the Commonwealth in England. And I believe the Stuart family knew that their time was short and they needed to relocate. And when you look at the Stuarts, a big deal is made about they were Catholic, they were Catholic. All their issues and the problems and why they were run out of England is because they were Catholic and they kept trying to bring. Well, look at the Stuarts. It goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It uh you've got Stuart monarchs who were Protestant. You've got Stuart monarchs who were Protestant, but sympathetic to Catholics. Then you've got Protestants who were militantly against Catholics. Then you have Stuart Catholics who were sympathetic to Protestants, and then the complete opposite. Um, the one thing that is common in all of them is that the Stuarts held very close to this idea of the divine right of kings, that the monarchy was appointed by God, and they got this you know obsession and adherence to this divine right of kings, the Stuarts in particular, because they come from the Merovingian, or they supposedly, their lore is that they come from the Merovingian line, and the Merovingian line is the supposed line of the child of Christ and Mary Magdalene. Well, that right there should throw you off of any idea that they cared at all between Catholic and Protestant, because the Merovingian divine right of kings bloodline of Mary Magdalene and Christ, just at its base, is heresy. Um, by the standards of the Christian church and Christ as a deity. Um, so what I find interesting is that, people go back and forth, especially in the conspiracy and hidden history world, that the Stuarts were this religion, they were that religion, they were this religion, or they were Protestant, they were Catholic, whatever. But at their very core, what they believed in was the divine right of kings based on a bloodline that, to believe it would be to believe a heresy. Um, and I find that interesting. I think that the Stuarts were more adept at using religion to maintain power. if you claim one side or the other, you know, as a monarch, that you are going to have the support of that side of religion to fight your wars. That's my idea that I'm exploring further. And I've got a big timeline that I'm putting together now where basically the Stuart history from the 1500s up through the Revolution and into the 1800s um, is very closely associated with America and everything that happened in America, including our revolution, including our founding, the colonies, Bacon's rebellion. And it seems to me that we were kind of the fail-safe, that America was kind of the safe haven um, for this Stuart, this possible Stuart dynasty, or almost the ideals of the Stuart dynasty, and that the writing on the wall, or that there was the writing was on the wall that the monarchy in England wasn't going to be um, their jam anymore, and they needed somewhere to continue their power and their control. And I think by rebranding into secret societies and Masonry in particular, and Scottish Rite Freemasonry in particular, those ideals were kind of carried over. And blah, blah, blah. I'm a dummy. I'll leave you guys with this one last thing. Continuing this line from William and Mary, from the William and Mary Tree of Life, through the crown, all the way over. You go through Constantinople, and you land, interestingly enough, directly on the front doorstep of. It's going to be cool, I promise. I'm sorry for the. Be nice to have Daniel here to bounce this off of and to fill the ridiculous space in between me trying to navigate Google Earth. Okay, so what you're looking at right here, the deviation of this line that goes from William and Mary all the way through Bruce Castle, Constantinople, it lands directly on the doorstep of the Saint Pierre Cave Church in Antioquia, which, for those who don't speak a mixture of Turkish and French, it is St. Peter's Cave Cathedral or Church in Antioch. Now, this is supposedly the secret cave church that the Apostle Peter preached at in the first century in Antioch. Okay. It's also the place where supposedly during the fall of Antioch, during the Crusades, under the floor of this cave church of St. Peter was found the spear of destiny, the spear of, or the lance of Longinus, the spear that pierced the side of Christ at the crucifixion, which has been sought after and changed hands, supposedly. And there's several different versions of it in different churches owned by different governments. This is one of the possible examples of it. And the story is that during the fall of Antioch, during the Crusades, Um, Underneath the floor of St. Peter's Cave Church in Antioch, the Spear of Destiny was found hidden, and it moved from there to Constantinople, um, and then sort of disappeared for a while. And then there are two other examples that kind of made their rounds, different armies, different generals and presidents and emperors stole them, kings, and traded them. And so the provenance of which one is which gets a little muddled, but I do find the idea of Oak Island and Williamsburg and Constantinople and this kind of idea of these different kind of hiding places across the globe interesting when one of those places sort of points to um, where the Spear of Destiny was supposedly one of the possible spears of destiny was found. So I can barely talk anymore, and I'm gonna get some sleep and have a throat lozenge. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I'll run back to William and Mary so you can just see one last time this totally crazy configuration and all these alignments. And um, I hope you don't think I'm as crazy as I feel when I look at this. Um, but it's just some of these measurements and things like that, they don't add up to coincidence in my book. And so I hope you enjoyed it. Um, God, if you have any ideas that can further this research, or um, you see anything that I don't see, or you want to take some of these alignments and run in different directions and see where they land, man, I'm almost positive they're gonna deviate in some pretty cool places. Like I said, I've got another like a timeline that I'm gonna do a presentation about that really ties in Jacobites, Stuarts, Merovingians with the United States in particular in our founding. Um, and then also this idea of Pythagoras and the Pythagorean theorem and Pythagoreanism. Um, I'm starting to see a connection and a parallel with the Anglican Episcopal Church, and I've got some really crazy. You know what? I'll leave you with this as a quick um, as a real quick end note here. These lines here form a perfect Pythagorean triangle. Okay, and the corner points of this triangle all represent some of the oldest Episcopal churches in the colonies. Um, some of the first three. You've got Bruton Parish up here, Saint somebody over here in Richmond, and then so you've got these are the three earliest forts and settlements in Virginia. You've got Jamestown, Williamsburg area. You've got the Richmond settlement, and you've got the Petersburg settlement, and where all of these super old Episcopal churches fall with super old parish histories, um, form a perfect Pythagorean triangle. And um, I've started to measure out into Virginia, trying to see if there's. So this is a representation of the Pythagorean triangle with these squares coming off of each side. And spoiler alert, I've found the complete square, which also falls on some of the oldest Episcopal churches. I mean, directly on them too. Like it's kind of crazy. this could be coincidence, but it's still very interesting. And what I find again really interesting is that when you follow this big hot pink line from Bruton Parish and you're heading towards Petersburg, go figure, it goes directly through that center point, um, which means beauty on the Kabbalistic tree of life. Everything kind of deviates and converges right here in the very dead center of um, the sunken garden at William and Mary. And then again, if you take this exact configuration over to Oak Island, everything kind of converges at that same point there. So there might be a reason to, pop a hole in the ground there too. Laguna Brothers. Anyway, I'm done bothering you guys. I can barely talk. Thanks for listening to me. Please share with your friends. Give us give us some if you like us, you don't have to, but if you do like us, star reviews and star ratings. We're starting to get a really healthy following and significant downloads. But that'll, star ratings will definitely bump us up in kind of the algorithm and get us seen more. And we're just really enjoying doing this. So, if you'd help us out with some of those, that'd be really cool. Really, if we suck and you hate us, tell us in the comments, but still give us a 5 star. And if you write us a really crappy review, but give us a 5 star review, but then a strongly worded negative review, I'll read it out loud, and it could be pretty funny. And we'll admit where you're right. So anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll talk at you next time. Thank you. I'm gonna weirdly stare at the computer screen while I try to pull up the Zoom page. And you are sure. Stop the share. There we go. Hey, okay, bye.